You do mention a scenario in your book, and there was some waiter was asking you
Yeah.
the big question, why are you walking? And you
Yes.
said, the answer fired through me, I just want to be a better man.
Yeah, it was one of the first times, I think 2 days before I walked into Düsseldorf, where I began to sort of repeat this mantra that I just want to become a better man. And it was sort of like the first time when I had this notion that I was doing this for more than just the walk. I actually did this to become more of a man, go from a boyhood to manhood, and to take more responsibility for my life. And I actually called the walk my Camino toward a new life. And so I obviously had an instinctual understanding or an awareness of that this was something important, that to that degree. So I think that becoming a better man was sort of an experience of, wow, this is actually making me, yeah, become more or become a better Gideon or man. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Carol Saunders, host of the Spiritual Forum podcast. This podcast is a voice of hope, inspiration, and awakening. And if you're on a spiritual journey, the people that I talk to from around the world will inspire you with their wisdom and their insights. I'm glad that you're here. Remember to step into your divine nature and welcome to the forum. Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so happy to be with you today. My guest today is Gideon Enok, and he's traveled the world since 2010 and has lived in several countries, including the United States, Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Slovakia, and Spain. He has walked over 7,000 kilometers with a backpack and considers himself a pilgrim on a lifelong pilgrimage. He is the author of The Pilgrim Spirit, which is about a 5-month walk through Europe during the 2020 worldwide pandemic, which transformed his life in many different ways. There's a lot more to tell about Gideon's story, and I'm going to let him tell it. Welcome, Gideon.
Thank you very much, Carol. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's great to have you. I know you approached me several months ago, and I always like having young voices on the podcast because
Mm.
there's a lot of people who are in their, elder years, 60s, 70s, even 80s, who've gained a lot of wisdom. And it's really rare to find people in younger generations who are on this spiritual pursuit. So I love having people like you on this podcast. So thank you for your contribution to the world. Before we get into your journey, which is absolutely fascinating, can you give us a little bit of background about what caused you to go on this journey, the Camino, which you started way back in Denmark, where most people start in France or Spain? What is it? How did your life build up to that point? I'm really interested in your spiritual story.
Yeah. So it actually goes back to 2009. I had watched the movie The Secret, like many people had at that time, and I went to an event where one of the speakers were speaking one day. And after that day, I signed up for his program. And when I sat down at the office at my sales job on Monday, it was like a twilight zone where everything just shifted completely. It was like I was so aware of everything that was going on around me. It was almost like I could read what people were thinking before they said anything. It was really strange. And I went to my boss, who was my friend, and I said, I can't work today. I need to, yeah, I just can't. And he was such a good guy. And we sat down and talked, and he said, go home and write it all down for a couple of days and then come back. And that was really important because I began to realize something was shifting. I began to order and read books like you can't believe. I had stacks of books in my little apartment that I would never get to read because I had so many. And I just began to see possibilities in life when it came to entrepreneurship. It could be just understanding, being more aware of myself, my mind, who I was. And I definitely connected to a path already then in terms of like I belonged to this idea of learning, studying, and becoming more than I was, and look for more possibilities than just having a job. Um, and so that kind of continued through the year. And during the end of the year, I had an investment go really bad and lost a bunch of money, and didn't had the best New Year's Eve of my life. I sat in my parents' office, and my dad came in and gave me food while all their friends was having a lot of fun in the living room. And so that was not the best of times. But 2 days after, January 2nd, it was so clear when I woke up, like something needs to change. Okay, well, I'm gonna go travel. I need to go out there and renew myself and live differently. That was sort of my intention. And because my friend, who was had been my boss, had been let go 6 8 months before, it sort of got me to this, yeah, leap of faith where I'm gonna go there too. I'm gonna go to Australia where he went to start things. So I let go of everything I had, my apartment, my things, sold and gave away what I could, and packed a backpack and literally said to my parents, "I am leaving. I'm not coming back." So I'm sure that was a bit devastating for them, um, but I just had to do something
Yeah.
to get me on the path of something that made sense, and that was it. So yeah, started traveling.
Well, let me pause for a minute because it's interesting that your awakening happened with just pretty much attending an event. A lot of people have to really hit bottom, like really go through drugs and alcohol and all sorts of horrible things until they find themselves literally in the gutter.
Mhm.
And then they kind of turn towards the light and have this awakening. A lot of people have that happening. Others really get into a deep meditative practice and have some sort of transcendent experience. But you just awakened in this moment, uh,
Yeah,
being a part of a presentation.
it was a 1 day event. Yeah, it was not. It was not even that long. I think it was like 6 hours or something. So yeah, I think I just found out that there was more people like me who were sort of in the same situation where they wanted to
Ah,
learn, they wanted to grow, they wanted to be a part of something. And already
yeah.
later in the year in September, I was actually in Florida to be certified with this guy's company to become a life coach or whatever, and because that was really hip at the time, everybody was like getting becoming life coaches. Um, Obviously, I was not ready for it because I was definitely not mature to pursue such a thing, but I had my heart in the right place. You know, I
Was
knew
it's mature that you knew that you weren't mature enough?
right. Yeah, maybe. But I spent too much money on that. But anyway, I was on the path. You know, I was on the path of discovery and exploring, and I think traveling became my education, and that's what started when I left Denmark on February 15th, 2010, and yeah, I just continued traveling from that point on. So
What'd you find in traveling? I think about uh, I think about a lot of spiritual stories where people venture
mm,
out and they travel and then they end up coming home and finding out that their treasure was at home. So I'm just wondering for you, what did you find in traveling, which I think is probably different than walking the Camino?
yeah, I think there was two things. One was I began to find people who also were similar to me, wanting were open minded in the sense that they wanted to explore themselves and the world and different places, and it just seemed very easy to be around these people, travelers, backpackers, and I there was a kind of a belonging there, I think. And another reason is, and that sort of continued. I think that's continued as much as I traveled. But my friend Stefan, who was already in Perth in Australia when I arrived, he had already had 4 or 5 months where he literally left with a carry-on backpack. He had only cash, only the clothes that he could wear. Almost, he had two pairs of socks and like an extra pair of a t-shirt or something, and that meant that the first 4 or 5 months he had really burned the bridges, and really like I want to live a different life too, and I need to have like an ultra focus to make that happen. And that meant that when I came down there, he found a job and been in this experience of being in a new place where you just have to make it. You know, there's no other option than to focus and to make it happen. And he talked to me about it, this trusting the unknown, this idea of trusting that things will work out
Mhm.
and be okay. And that was a big deal for me when we talked about those things, because that really helped me to just see that, yeah, things will work out. Of course they will. And when you begin to experience that, you gain so much confidence in yourself, and that you can actually make things happen by yourself. So that was probably one of the biggest lessons early on in my travels, that I began to continue to rely on. No matter where I was, I just knew everything would be okay. So that was a conviction that I just sort of developed very early on, which was really nice.
So I want to bring this back to spirituality because a lot of people think that spirituality is just mediums and crystals and spirits and spirit guides. And I do talk to people with those experiences on my podcast,
Yeah,
but I really like these real life experiences where you dig deep into yourself and find out who you are, become a better person, the person that you are. But the themes that I pick up are like surrender and humility and faith. And I don't know if your fellow travelers have a sense of a power beyond us, or if they just translate that into, I know things are going to be okay and I can trust the unknown. But to me, that is faith. That is trusting that the universe will guide you, show you, and reveal things to you.
agreed. Yes. And that was, if we have to speed ahead a bit in terms of the long walk, I mean, that was faith was that was what carried me, or what was what I relied on really. So yeah, that was faith is a beautiful word, and a beautiful sort of, it has so much energy, and beautiful energy, that word, I think. So
Well, let's talk about the Camino because
yes,
there are some days there were some days that it really did take faith. It really took enormous faith and enormous surrender and trust. And I appreciate that you highlighted a few chapters for me to read, which I
mm,
did, 10 or 12. And I think your writing is really good, and I really appreciate that. And some of the things that you went through, losing your money and being
yeah,
stuck in the rain and walking through uncharted territory and having no food, and that is it reminds me of the Peace Pilgrim. I don't know if you're about the
mm.
Peace Pilgrim, but
I
she's
know
a
of
woman who
her.
walked across the
Yeah,
United States with absolutely okay, yeah, yeah. She had nothing in her pockets and just trusted that she would be supplied. And your
yeah,
journey sounds so similar.
yeah.
Where would you like to start in talking about your Camino journey?
Yeah, let me start from how it began, or how it sort of got started. And I can just mention that I actually am quoting Peace Pilgrim in the part going into Belgium. So she's quoted in the book as well. So, but yeah, that all started when I was going through a breakup scenario, or a breakup situation, from a very short-lived relationship that lasted only 3 months. But it sort of took me back into a cycle that I sort of maybe ignorantly or innocently thought I had left, or wished I had left, but sort of returned to, and that made me sort of feel very stuck and in a very negative, frustrating, annoying sort of place, where I felt like, okay, I'm just back in the same rut. And it just didn't make me feel very good. And I moved into this red farmhouse in the middle of nowhere, and with two older people that probably it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, they were really kind, but it was just I didn't fit in there. I didn't fit there. So it was just a strange sort of situation, and I was so frustrated with my life and myself. And every time I woke up, I kind of wish I didn't, and it just got worse and worse. But
Mm.
then on the 30th morning, when I woke up, I was like, this has to stop. Things have to change. And I mean, yesterday, like right now. So I woke up with a very decisive intention that I want things to change now. And so, because I've had some experience with meditation, I sat down for, I didn't know it was going to be 3 hours, but it became 3 hour meditation. And after such a session, you can sometimes feel like you need to shake it up a bit, and move. So I decided to take a 2 hour walk to the ocean. And I had a lot of experience already, because I had sort of walked 2 to 3 times a day, short walks, but just constantly moving, and to go through this transition. So when I did that 2 hour walk, I arrived at the ocean, and it was a very calm day. It was June 7th. So it was calm and nice, and the summer had sort of peaked, and things were good, at least on the, what seemed like on the outside. And and I stood out there looking out over the shore, and all of a sudden there was this very vivid voice saying, or asking, "Why don't you walk from Denmark to Santiago, Gideon?" And it was like somebody was standing next to me. I was literally like, because there was no one there, but it was almost like somebody was there asking me this question, because it was so clear and vivid. And I looked around, smiling, curious, being slightly inspired. What does this mean? Didn't really understand it fully, probably at the time, but it sort of lifted my energy a bit. And then I headed to the harbor, where I was going to meet my parents for lunch. I texted them that I would be there, so they would they were there meeting me when I arrived. So when we sat down for something to eat, I shared what had happened, and they could just tell that something had shifted in me. I was just looking very excited, happy, smiling, and I hadn't really done that for quite a while. So when I shared it, that was sort of when the answer to the question came, I think. And it lingered for the day, maybe the day after, but then I made the decision I need to go. And 2 weeks later, after that voice had asked me this question, I started walking, but having no idea why. All I really had was the trust, great trust in the unknown, and relied on this, on faith to guide me. This energy that I felt was pulling me towards Santiago and Finisterre, which means the end of the earth, in the northwest of Spain. So it was interesting because during that 2020 time, obviously the whole world was in a very different place and very uncertain, a very uncertain time where there was restrictions and lockdowns, and but it had no, I didn't focus on that at all. It had, I didn't even have it in my mind. I was completely focused on this yeah, this path, this energy that I was gonna trust. That was all that occupied my mind really, and I think that made it easier in some way. You know, that I just relied on that. That, yeah, that was how it got started.
It sounds like you didn't have any resistance to the voice or the idea, which is really interesting. A
Yeah.
lot of people would kind of second guess, like, what was that? Why, and all of
Mhm.
that. And or during now, when the world's shutting down, and how will that be? And you just were really, I'm going to use the word obedient, but I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean, just really surrender to spirit, to the pull. And I really want to highlight that because I do think that often we are called for something,
Mhm.
towards something, and there are usually so many reasons that we can come up with not to do it. And certainly the COVID years would have been a reason for you,
Mhm.
but you just push right through that, like, like
Yeah.
none of that matters, and none of that did matter.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm still curious about how that happened. I often think back and say, because the obvious question, why did you walk? Because I really didn't know. And then people can ask me now, why do you know why you walk now? And I mean, I can only sort of, my answer is, well, when I look at what my life is like now, at least the way I feel about myself and the people around me and what happened after, well, that's part of the symptom of the walk, I guess, but it's not really why I walked. I think I just, it's hard for me to answer. I don't think I can really define why I walked, other than I was just meant to. It
Well,
was an obvious
yeah,
person sent it.
you do mention yeah, you do mention a scenario in your book, and there was some waiter was asking you
Ah, yeah,
the
yeah.
big question, "Why are you walking?" And you
Yes.
said, "The answer fired through me. I just want to be a better man."
Yeah, it was one of the first times, like I think 2 days before I walked into Düsseldorf, where I began to sort of repeat this mantra that I just want to become a better man. And it was sort of like the first time when I had this notion that I was doing this for more than just the walk. I actually did this to become more of a man, go from a boyhood to manhood, and to take more responsibility for my life. And I actually called the walk. I documented the whole trip on my YouTube channel, and I called the walk my Camino toward a new life. And so I obviously had an instinctual understanding or an awareness of that this was something important, you know, that to that degree. So I think that becoming a better man was sort of an experience of, wow, this is actually making me, yeah, become more or become a better Gideon or man. Yeah. So that was the first sort of hint that something was underway here. So yeah.
Well, the whole thing seems like a ritual or a rite of passage, actually. There were native peoples used to send their young boys out into the wilderness, and they would come back a man, and they would change their name. And those kinds of rites of passage we really don't have in our Western society, but that's really what it was for you. Would you like to share? First, let's talk about the three parts of the journey. What is it, like the physical, and
The
yeah, the
three phases
mental,
of the
and yeah,
Camino.
yeah, the three phases of the Camino. And then let's go into what are some of the things that you experience about other people and yourself that made you a better man.
Hmm. Yes, so the three phases of the Camino, just to kind of give an idea how that came into my life. When I walked my first walk in 2014, that was my first Camino on the French way of the Camino. And then the next year I walked in Portugal, in 2015. And on halfway in on the one in 2014, I met this guy, Mr. Armstrong from Alaska, and he shared this idea with me, the three phases of the Camino, which he had heard from another pilgrim. So it's not an original idea that I have. I just like talking about it, and I like to elaborate on it in my book. So yeah, so it's about the physical, mental, and spiritual phases. And the fun part, the way it's interesting to talk about, is actually to kind of relate them to that French way of the Camino in terms of how that is structured as a walking path. Because in the beginning of that path, it's mountainous. There's a lot of history. Pamplona is a very historic place. Obviously, a lot of people who walk from there, they have never walked before, and they're very excited, right? And they're fascinated, and they're just looking with great intent to. I'm not, with excitement, but at the same time, it's also a little bit on the surface because you haven't experienced it yet, so you don't really know what it's going to do to you and all that stuff. And it takes, for most people, 10 to 15 days to actually get used to the rhythm of walking 10, 15, 20 kilometers a day, or 25 or 30, however long you walk. But that's a phase you just have to get through before you get into this rhythm of the walk and getting into this deeper phase, which is the mental phase, and probably the most important one, because that's when you have sort of broken down a bit in terms of the physical, right? And you are used to the physical. It's not really, you're kind of used to it now. It's a habit, and you sort of are more accustomed to the rhythm and so on. And then you go into the mental phase. And what's interesting is that after Burgos, which is the first big city, probably, I mean, the biggest city after Pamplona, that's when you enter the Meseta in the north of Spain, where there is about nothing. There is just urban. There's about no trees. There's just fields, and you don't really encounter mountains or really extraordinary nature. So you enter that phase when you have been broken down a bit, right? And then you begin to get into this deeper phase where you think about a bit more about your darkness or your heaviness and your burdens or the challenges that you've had, and a lot of those things are loosening up inside of you. That means that you are feeling that more, so that can cause you to feel angry and frustrated and sad, and people can cry. And the first walk I had, we were in a group of like 9 or 10 people, and right when we started to go into the meseta, we all broke up into either smaller pairs or alone. It was just a complete natural thing that happened, that people sort of instinctively understood that I need to be here for me now. This is my path. I need to kind of go through this to figure out the reason why I'm actually here. Um, so it's a phase where a lot of things are going on, and you're literally sort of walking through difficulties and letting go of this emotional and mental onion layers of an onion, where you just let go of things a little bit. And as you do that, let you'll then enter the spiritual phase where you feel more connected to yourself. You can feel more connected to pilgrims around you. Perhaps you're calling your mom and dad and say, "I'm sorry for what I said, a month ago," or whatever it may be. You sort of
Mm.
opening yourself up a bit more than you have been, and connect to um, the experience, the path. And what's interesting is that I think people eventually. So what I should say is that in the end of the walk, you after the meseta, you enter the region of Galicia, and it's a beautiful region in the northwest of Spain. It's my favorite region, and I often relate to it as the Shire from the Lord of the Rings, and I mentioned the Shire a few times
Mm.
in the book because it's just so luscious. It rains a bit more there. It's just green, and when the sun is on, it's almost like there's a sort of this yellow glow everywhere. And the small villages they're still herding their cattle and their goats through the narrow walkways and streets and so on, and like they're sort of moving towards the future in their own pace, and it's just an amazing place, and also a place where people just feel more happier when they have walked for 30, 40 days. They have been accustomed to being a pilgrim now, and so it's a very interesting path, especially the French way of the Camino, because how it is structured in that way, I think, and also because there's so many people who have walked there. I mean, it's been walked for more than 1,000 years, and probably many millions of people, and there's probably a reason why so many people come both do it but also come back and feel like there is an energy here. There's definitely something here, and it must be because
Mhm,
there's
mhm.
so many people through.
Interesting.
overview of the three phases, which you can relate to anything in life. I mean, they could be called the three phases of life, right? So anytime you embark on something new, where you need to be when you're embarking on something new, like playing an instrument or anything that you sort of need to learn, yes, your excitement can get you going and you need motivation for that to get going. But then all of a sudden you will hit a time when you really need to do the work, right? And study and where it's not as fun, but you really need to go through that to get to that phase of yeah, having it grow on you and so on until you can find the flow of playing a new song or speak a new language or whatever it may be. So um, yeah, it's just good to think about as a
Well, I think it's a metaphor for all of life. I mean, like we start off, in our childhood and our teens and early 20s and 30s. Most people are really immersed in the physical, and then there is some work to do on your thoughts and your patterns and your behaviors. And if you do that work, then you eventually get to this connection and the spiritual.
yeah.
So I think it's a really great metaphor for taking on something for your walk and for life in general. Unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck in the physical, or they can't
Mhm.
really push through that. I don't know if people ever stop their walk because of their physical or not,
Oh,
but
I'm sure.
I
I'm
know in
sure it's
life
happening.
people get really enmeshed in the material.
Yeah, I'm sure that's happening. And one thing I want to add though is also that the the beauty the beautiful part about walking is that it's slow. It really takes us back to, I think, we reconnect with our ancestors in some way. Like the world has been populated because we walk. We The first and best and most important accomplishment of our life is to stand up and walk as young kids, right?
Uh,
And everybody around us is happier than us because they know that, well, there's probably a bigger chance for us that we will survive now. And I think it's like genetically that we just haven't, we just know we know that it's so important. um, and when we then walk far, the subtitle of my book is "The longer you walk, the deeper you go." And the reason why I have added that there is because been my experience. The longer you walk, the deeper you definitely go. And because it's going so slow, just like a tree, when it grows, a tree that grows slow grows strong. And I think that when we walk slow or walk in the pace that we have as people when we walk, it makes us let go of the things we need to let go of slowly. And it also makes us receive the things we didn't even know we needed slowly. And that means that we will gain what it is that we sort of need for our future, for our life. But it's also happening, that gain is happening also in a slow way. So that means that when we are finished with the walk, it stays with us. It's not like a quick vacation where an event where we have a beautiful experience for a week and then 2 weeks later it's almost like we don't even remember what it was like. And that's one of the things that I really find profound when it comes to walking, especially the people I know who has done long walks, because they have this experience that things are staying with them. I walked with my partner last year. We walked the French way of the Camino together, and I told her, when we come back to this dining room table, your life will be different. And so many things shifted for her, and she's going in a place where she's going much more deeper in herself now, and which was a shift for her. And I've just seen it and heard it so many times, and that's why I think that when I compare my all my travels and my experiences with marathons and going to silent retreats and going to um, Ayurveda in India and studying and reading and going to events and all these things, there's nothing that really compares to my long walking experiences, because those experiences stay with me. They stay with me in such a profound way, and that's why I just love walking, and I would recommend anybody trying to do a long walk. Of course, if they feel called to do it, yeah, that's why I really see it as such a beautiful experience, because it really makes a difference.
It sounds like it's soul work. Like it's
Mhm.
if it
Yeah.
the fact that that sticks with you and you're a transformed person. You're doing soul work. You're doing the growth, and that's what I find so fascinating about your story. And that's
Mhm.
what I'd like to get into next, because I saw themes of, not themes, but instances of anger and surrender and learning about abandonment and relationship issues and these kinds of things that most of us deal with every day, self doubt. Most of us deal with every day without really distinguishing it or doing anything about it. We get stuck in these patterns of self doubt and anger and abandonment and whatever. And so I'd love for you to share maybe a couple of your deeper learnings about yourself during the walk that transformed you.
Yes, I mean, I can start with the. Let's see. I mean, I like sharing the spiritual bus stop experience, or that because that's kind of combines a spiritual principle of surrender, but also kind of shares the beautiful human nature and beautiful connection we can have with human beings that we don't even know, because that happens so often when you walk, that you encounter this openness between you and other people you have never met before. And yeah, so that was my last full walking day in Belgium. I woke up in my tent, and I just pointed at the map and found this town, Deutsche, and I just, okay, let's go. I'm going there. And it was one of those days, like many of the days in Belgium, where I was a little, everything took a little longer. I was, yeah, everything dragged out sort of during the day when I walked in the forest and up and down, and the time went to 3 o'clock, then 4 o'clock, and 5 o'clock, and I, had less and less food, and was sort of wondering more and more of where I'm going to stay for the night. And I found a tent or a campsite that was on the map, but it was not in reality. So everything seemed to sort of drag out a bit. And finally, I arrived into the little village, the mountain village in Deutsche, and it was 6:30 in the evening, and had no idea where I was going to stay. But I was just happy to at least know that I had arrived where I had decided to go. And right in the entrance or entry of the village, I saw a supermarket that was open, or a little market. And I said, "Yes, okay, great. I have that down. I'm gonna go down to the during or through the village to just make sure I have a place to stay for the night." And that didn't take long. It took 2 to 3 minutes. So you can imagine that the village is not very was not very big. And I found this government building where there was a nice little plaque, a Camino plaque symbol, which means that they are assisting pilgrims. But in this on this day, they were closed, so they were not open, and I couldn't ask for help there. So I sat outside and wondering what am I going to do now. I didn't really walk any further, so the hotels in the in France, 4 or 5 kilometers away, was not really attractive. So I sat there for, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes or whatever. And then I was like, okay, I need to just at least find some food first, and then we'll go from there. So I headed back down to the supermarket, but it was closed, of course. So no chance there. And down the list of things I needed to do, I was a virtual assistant, so I had to check in every day, and I sat down on my backpack and connected my phone and whatever, and tried to do a little bit of work there. But it didn't take long. Then it began to rain. So I sat underneath the awning there next to the shopping carts, and well, not for long, because I had to stand up and put my pack on again, and there was small torrents of water coming down, and it just got wet really fast. And that's when I began to get really frustrated, because obviously that was not the ending of the day I had envisioned. So if anybody goes to my YouTube and find that day, I was spewing out slurs in both Danish and English, and just being really, really frustrated, because I felt like I was just out of options. I didn't. I mean, I had a tent, but setting up a tent in the rain is like meaningless. And then I could walk, of course, and I guess that's what I did, because I'd maybe been so used to walking that I just automatically began to walk irrationally down through the village again. And then all of a sudden, the clouds just opened, and it just smashed down with rain that you can't believe. So I just set off running, and the only thing I had in mind was the entrance to the government building, because I remembered that it was big enough that I could at least stand in there and be dry. But I didn't get that far. I saw a bus stop and just skipped into it like a deer that I was, being shot at or something. And then I just sat in there. It had already gotten really dark. Everything was dark. It was raining. I had to really go to the bathroom, and I didn't have any more food. And there was just, I was just, there was nothing I could do. I was just sitting in there, and that's what I realized eventually, that there was nothing I can do now. I just have to sit here. And I began this mantra that there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. And it took me some repetitions to actually get to the point of, okay, there's nothing I can do. So I then all of a sudden just completely surrendered to the situation. And what was interesting was that I was recording a video when I did that. And as soon as I felt this energy, or this kind of liberating myself from being in control, I guess, in some aspect, there was a car dropping off a man on the other side, opposite side, who went into the house opposite the bus stop. And I don't know if he saw me. I don't know if he saw me from the inside first, but it didn't take long before he sort of went out and sort of waved me over to ask or inquire about what I was doing. And I tried to explain to him through the translation app, from English to French, that I didn't find a place to stay. I'm a pilgrim, and I'm just here, kind of lost. And he looked at me with sort of respect and sort of kindness and say, well, because he couldn't speak English, and I just understood that as, okay, he can't help me, and no problem. And so I went back over and sat. But then a few minutes later, he came back out and sort of waved me over to bring my things. So I did that, and he invited me inside, and I got a stool to sit down on, and he gave me a little drink and so on, and he began to sort of explain in body language, calling and sleeping, and I didn't really know what that really meant until there was a guy standing at the door 10 minutes later or something, and they were obviously very acquainted and knew each other and were smiling, so I was comfortable with the situation, and after a few minutes, he said, "Well, get into my van," and then I just followed him and jumped into his van. And not long after, I we parked. Yeah, we parked outside of their house. Him and his wife, and she had prepared, this big table with food, and they were just kind and happy and smiling like they found pilgrims everywhere. And I just sat there, in complete awe, and just said merci and merci and merci all the time. And what was more extraordinary was when I woke up the next morning, they were gone. They had probably gone to work, and it was just an empty house and with food again. And they had made a little pack of food for me to bring along, and then took the keys and put them in the mailbox, and off I went. And I saw then the guy down at the government building who was in construction, and I was able to say thank you and shake his hand and so on. So yeah, it was so interesting to look back in that situation and wonder why did it happen the way it did. But it's starting happening as soon as I surrender completely. Then something changed. So so yeah, that was one of the first kind of learning experiences.
Yeah, that surrender, then you're open to receiving, and the universe is abundant. And these people were very generous, and it sounds like you didn't really have any fear about anything going awry. And it reminds me, your journey reminds me of in the Lord's Prayer, give us this day our daily bread. Like you were really kind of walking with daily bread or walking with nothing and getting daily bread. It's like, it wasn't like you had a big supply of anything and you ran out of food sitting there and then surrender and then help and food and hospitality come. I love that story. You said that that's a great story about how you've encountered pleasant experiences with people you'd never met before. You also had sort of transformative experiences with people that you knew, like somewhere along your journey, your walk, you had some revelation around your grandmother, for example, and
Yes.
that
Mhm.
relationship ended up being
Yes.
healed.
Yeah, that was the climax of my trip, day 79. That was, yeah, I don't miss that day in the sense of the pain I felt. But to give people a sense of why I ended up in so much pain was that after Paris, I needed new shoes. That was sort of a bit less than halfway to Santiago and Finisterre, and I needed new shoes, and I was very focused on getting Gore-Tex shoes for some reason, meaning that I didn't want wet feet. But as Gore-Tex makes the shell of a shoe a little harder and a little more needed more time to for the feet to adjust, and I didn't really think when I chose those. And already wandering around my two off days or a few off days in Paris, I already began to feel like these are not comfortable. And as soon as I began walking the day I was leaving Paris, about 2 hours out of this main part of the city, I just began to. I sat on this bench and I was looking back at the store and was wondering, should I go back and get other shoes because this is not going to work. But my hope, I guess, my what do you say, my ignorant hope was like, okay, I maybe they're very tight around my foot, so I hope that will be that'll be good enough. But yeah, I continued walking like I already always did. I didn't like walking backwards, so I continued, and the next few days it just got slowly worse and worse and worse. um, Day 78, I walked into this campsite, and on a day where I had wanted to go to a campsite that was 12 kilometers before that, but it was closed. So I had to walk 12 kilometers in a way where it was just so painful already then. And it was almost like 12 kilometers were double the distance when I at that
Mm.
particular point in time. So the next morning on day 79, that's when things really got interesting. I started walking 8 kilometers from that campsite where I was in, or where I was sleeping. The first town was called in French probably Angaville or Angville or something, but in English it would probably be pronounced Angerville, and that really set the tone for the day because it was going to be a very different kind of day. I bought some food, some baked goods, and so on, and then I sat down to figure out where I'm going to stay for the night. I had the food, and I had two options. I could go 17 kilometers and pitch my tent and sleep on an air mattress that doesn't work, or I could go to the hotel, almost half, what do you say, the double the distance almost, 32 kilometers away. And I was like, I'm not going to do the campsite because I can't sleep well enough, and I'm going to do the hotel because I have already done longer walks. So okay, I can do this. I've done longer walks, no problem. But as soon as I booked that hotel room, it was almost like there was a snake, a cold snake descending down my spine. Like it's almost like the opposite of having a gut feeling that's positive. It was almost like the opposite, where this just meant to me that this you're gonna walk into a
Hmm.
hell of a painful experience now, and I didn't really recognize that. I just remember the feeling that it was like just so cold all of a sudden, and wondering. Yeah, I had this scenario in my head. So I didn't think too much of it. I put on my backpack and set off. And just a few hundred meters later, I found out that it was 5 kilometers more. So not 32, but 37 kilometers more.
Mm.
And already then, like the first kilometers, I could just feel like I usually use my walking sticks. And I use them to push down into the ground so I get more momentum. And I did that. I had to do it a lot more that day or in the beginning because it was hurting so much. And on top of that, it was so hot. It was a really hot day, and I started along the highway, and then I went into left and walked into small villages and around cornfields and stuff. And then I began to go in the wrong direction, and everything was just burning. Like so, everything was beginning to get frustrating because everything was hot and painful and uncomfortable, and there was just no real experience of comfort at all. And then when I began to walk in the wrong direction, I mean that doesn't really help, at least not in my mood at that time. And I began to completely lose it. Like I just began to yell and scream like you can't imagine. I began to throw around my sticks like I was fighting wolves and people or animals that wanted to hit me or kill me or whatever. I was completely lost it. I mean, that was the mental phase, defined for me. And everything was burning. My skin was peeling off. It was just constant. Like it was like walking on thorns with sandpaper inside my shoes. I mean, nothing was comfortable. And by then, I had only walked. I think it was like 7 kilometers out of the 37 or something, or 17 maybe
Mhm.
out of the rest. So I had like 24 kilometers left or something when I walked into this new town where there was a supermarket. So I had a break there, had a few drinks, and then I began to walk along the railway the rest of the way. So one thing was good. I didn't have to look at my phone anymore. I could just sort of walk straight. And that's when things began to get really interesting. I began to walk slower. Everything was increasing in pain in terms of, I mean, I in the chapter 79, if you read that, you can see that I have probably used all the words you can find in the English dictionary for words that describe pain. And everything was burning. It was I walked slower and slower. Before I used my sticks to help me. Then I began to use the or to get me help me to move forward. Now I use the sticks to kind of keep me up or keep me actually sort of off, almost alleviate the pain off the ground. And sometimes I had to sort of lean on them to actually give my feet some rest because it was just burning. It was like I was on fire, literally. That was how it felt like. And I walked slower and slower. Normally, I walk 5 kilometers an hour, and by then, I probably walked 1 or max 2 kilometers an hour. So you can imagine, I was literally humping away. I could not walk any further or walk faster, and it just got worse and worse. And then I began to connect with the real essence of the pain and the answers that I was probably looking for in my life, because I got really connected to. I was beginning to ask myself, why have I been so angry in my life? Because I have been. I've been very angry in my life, trying to fight and resist everything, from parents to society and teachers and coaches and whatever you have. And that was sort of the first sort of insight that I got, wondering why am I been so angry. And it came through the pain, that question, that I began to think about it. And then I began to get into such a slow pace where all I could focus on was my one step at a time, one, two, one, two. And what was interesting was that just the night before I left, my youngest brother had told me this sentence, which was, "You need to rely on yourself. You need to be able to lean up against yourself and not rely on anything else or anybody else outside." And that's when I began, without really consciously thinking of that, doing it. I began to coach myself, saying, I can do this. I'm here. I was completely present and could only focus on the next step. And that's what I did. I literally counted one, two, one, two, to just train myself, or to focus on, I am moving forward with one step at a time. And when I began to do that more and more, I began to literally, I looked into the ground with a very sharp focus to say, why am I why am I resisting so many things in my life? Why is it that I've had such a difficult time with my grandparents, with my life, with things I'm coming from? And that's when answers began to come through the pain and the questions I had, and began to realize that there was abandonment, there was kind of a religious control from my grandparents, that all I wanted was for them to love me as I was, but I didn't have the experience that they actually did. So because of that, I resisted them so much, and it probably a little bit with my, probably connected with my parents as well to some degree, but especially my grandparents. And I realized that, yeah, abandonment and so on had been one of the core reasons for my resistance to so many things in my life. And so I got to an answer. But what was so interesting was, a couple of kilometers before I finished the day, I walked into this bubble of energy that I can only describe as grace. I was in immense pain still, but for the first time in on that day, I was able to smile. I was in complete presence of this bubble of energy I was just in, and you can probably call it surrender, but I was not conscious of doing that. It was almost like the resistance that I've carried through the day. It was like, okay, it can't continue, and the energy of it had to just be released in some way. So I was standing in that bubble for a few minutes or for a few seconds, however long it was. Yeah, was able to smile, be present, and realizing that I was not resisting the pain anymore. I was not resisting anything. I was just in it. And that planted seeds that day. And when I sat on the end of the bed, when I finished that day, I just knew something had changed significantly inside. And I think that experience has sort of carried me to what has happened since, because it was a really defining moment where I don't have to resist anymore. I can respond
Mm.
instead. So that was a beautiful, beautiful time.
Yeah. So, and later on, after the walk, it sounds like you had some healing experience with your grandmother, which we
Yeah.
don't have to go in here now. But I think there was an acceptance and an
Yes.
understanding that you wanted to be seen and heard, and that realizing that you could be in service to her, not
Mhm.
just the other way around,
Yeah.
if I
Yeah.
remember
Yeah. That was
correctly.
interesting. Yeah. She had been, just
Yeah.
briefly, she had been having aneurysms, and we visited her a couple years after. And my experience was that she was present because she didn't have a story anymore. She didn't really remember. She was just here. And that meant that I saw her, and experienced her, yeah, a presence that I hadn't experienced before. And it was almost like it completely deleted all the resistance I had because of that moment. And that was special. Yeah, that was a really important healing moment. Definitely.
Mm. Yeah. And I wanted to highlight that because I think a journey like the Camino h- really helps you have the experience of the divine leading you and guiding you and supplying you through people. And I also know that there is this inner thing that you went through where you did a lot of healing and shadow work and seeing what are the patterns that have plagued me my whole life and releasing all that and really transforming yourself. That's where the real, to me, spiritual
Yeah,
work is.
yeah,
So you're trusting the divine and you're doing the deep inner work and coming out a better man in the end. So I know we're running short on time, but one of the things, if it's okay,
mhm.
the last thing I'd be interested in your sharing about is the suicide note. I thought that was so interesting. Just what brought you to thinking there's a world you don't want to live in?
Yeah. That was a very strange time. I guess you could say that between since Paris and then up until day 99, that was really my mental phase. That was a really difficult and challenging phase. And day 99 was probably the last day where I really was struggling, and that had been going on for some days because I was beginning to feel confident enough to know, okay, I will finish this walk. But because of the way of the world, what is after for me? I've been traveling for 10 years of my life. I feel like moving around is a way of life. It's how I live and explore and experience and learn and so on. But what if I can't move? What is my life worth? And every all the ideas that I have, all the inspiration that I got began to sort of experience after day 79 began to blossom, right? Slowly, but it was almost like they were shut down all the time. And I thought about inspiring things throughout the day. So you can imagine hundreds and thousands of thoughts were just shut down because everything was shut down. I can't move the way I want to or the way I used to. And that was a very depressing time. So after some days with that, yeah, I wrote down my suicide note because what is my life worth when I get to Finisterre, when I can't move anymore? Then I have done, then I began to call it my last walk because that's what that was what I thought it was going to be. And so yeah, I wrote down my suicide note in my diary in kind of a strange detail about how I would go about that. And what I can say is that the day after I and the days after, I think I realized that, well, that was part of the journey. It was part of looking myself in the face in the darkness and to say, okay, I needed to experience that. I needed to look at that possibility as a thing, not because I will do it or want to do it, but it was part of the path in some capacity. And I never really thought about any of that after that. So I'm not sure if that is a satisfying answer, but that was sort of how it went.
What was it in the context of what was going on with all of the shutdowns around the world around COVID? Was it in that context?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Because things were so uncertain and things were so slowly heating up. I was trying to keep walking every day because I was really tired sometimes, where I probably should have taken a day off. But I was, it's getting winter. Is it getting into the fall soon, and it's not going to get easier. I knew that. So yeah, I was scared. I was a little worried.
It was a strange time, and it was a strange time, and yeah, a world in which we can't have free movement would be a world that would be very difficult to live in.
Yeah,
I know for myself, I went through a lot too during that time,
yeah,
big changes,
yeah,
major changes.
yeah,
What we really have to work for our freedom. It's so
mhm,
important. Our freedom of movement,
yeah.
being one of them. Yeah.
Oh, I just wanted to add that I was so grateful that I was called out on that walk because I think I would have gone completely crazy if I had stayed, in Denmark or some other place for a period of time. So walking was just such a blessing, and yeah, culminated with how everything else went. So yeah, interesting in itself.
It was definitely a divinely guided
Yeah.
walk. So let's just wrap this up. I'm interested in just your big takeaways about the walk. And you went through the final place, and then you went on to the end of the world place.
Yes.
And so what are when you look back, what are your major takeaways, your major learnings, and what would you like to share with anybody who's listening now?
Yes, if I can share a little story that leads to that, which the way I found you was because you had a conversation with Gregory David Roberts, who wrote the book Shantram. And in 2016, I read both of his books, and I really connected with him and the way he wrote. And I tried to listen to everything I could find about him, and he just spoke to me. I mean, I can't really say anything else. And in 2018, I wrote a list of a lot of things I wanted to experience and learn and do, and all that stuff. And at the top of the list was I wanted to meet him. I want to have dinner with him. And for some reason, it was very important to me, probably more important than anything else. And in 2020, I began walking, and a month into the walk, because he was no longer in public life, so when I actually wrote that down as a goal, it was not possible. So it was not possible to connect with him. But a month into the walk, he had started uploading music onto YouTube and so on, and I subscribed when I found him, and found out through his assistant that they knew that, or they saw that, because she said thank you for doing that. So obviously I was stoked, getting a bit closer. And I shared with her that I was documenting my trip and so on. We kept in touch, and she must have talked to him, because after my walk we had a conversation, and she told me that he wanted to talk to me, which was a surprise because I thought I was the one wanting to talk to him. But because of what I had done and so on, he thought that was interesting, and that started a relationship where I applied for a grant through his foundation, and then we started a collaboration where he became my writing mentor. And when I started writing the Pilgrim Spirit, which I started in beginning of 2022. And we had a conversation every 2 weeks, and then became once a week, and then twice a week, depending on where we were in the editing and all that stuff. And the answer then to what is the one of the more important outcomes for me during this whole experience is the idea of humility. He started to tell me in the beginning, Gideon, you need to write with humility, when he gave me feedback. That is something I will never forget, and also something that is really I didn't understand probably what he meant, or what that actually meant, to be humble, because I thought being honest was enough. So you know, honesty
Mm.
can sort of disguise judgment, right? And I was very good at that. And he pointed that out, and he said, you need to write with a humble voice, because then otherwise a reader will just see that you haven't really done any progress, right? And so every time there was an instance in the writing where I was judging somebody, judging my grandparents or society or whatever, he challenged me to rewrite and begin to think about what is the humble way to look at things. And that's when I began to forgive my grandmother more, my grandparents, and really begin to think of things very differently, with more perspective, and just more come from a place of I don't know, and acceptance or forgiveness, more than just judging. And because that was definitely a habit that I had gotten from my family. So one answer is definitely that Gregory helped me to connect with humility, because he's a very humble guy himself. He wrote Shantaram, where the foundation and his intention for the entire book is to write with humility. And that's why people connect with that book so much, I think. And what's interesting about that concept is also that the word humble is the root words of, or the root understanding of the word humble, means on the earth. So isn't it interesting that walking far
Mhm.
helped me to connect with a humble outlook on life, or at least one I'm practicing to become better at, or having with me. So I think one of the takeaways, or if the main takeaway, is definitely my amazing experience with Greg. I just love him. He's just an amazing guy who has been through so much. And I will, hopefully I can honor him with this book and everything we've done for the rest of my life. And he's just so amazing. And yeah, getting that humble approach has been key to my future and to my life since meeting him.
Well, what a great story. I think humility is something that we often overlook when it comes to spiritual living, and it is a foundation. It's foundational to find that humble place. And I know we don't need to get in too much into theology, but Jesus, the Christ, was the Christ as a humble being. It's like he was a humble person, and anybody who's attained any high level of spiritual consciousness comes with humility. So it's so wonderful that you have that he's your mentor, and that you've been able to have that relationship. And I do think he's come through in your writing, because you do have a
Mhm.
voice of humility
Yeah.
in your writing. So he contributed well to that. I'm going to go back and listen to my podcast I did with him. It was a few
Yeah.
years ago, and it was really interesting, and just
Yeah,
his whole experience in life was just like,
uh,
"Whoa," you know?
it's hard
I
to
was so
fathom.
disappointed when Apple Podcasts didn't renew that, they did a series, a show, and it was really good, but they didn't renew it, and I'd love to see his whole life story in a series.
Deserves more.
Well, Gideon, this has been wonderful to share with you and I mean, to learn from you and to be inspired by your experience. I I think that doing the Camino walk is something that probably a lot of people aren't considering or have reasons not to, but I'm sure somebody who's listening is hearing the call right
Yeah,
now,
hope so.
like this is for me to do. And I really love the idea that it is that earth experience and it is going through that physical and mental to get to the spiritual. And your stories of anger and frustration and pain and then redemption and healing are really inspiring, really inspiring. And I would also add that I didn't know you before, but I'm sure you accomplished becoming a better man.
Yes, I definitely feel like I have. Yeah, I'm more there than I was before the walk. That's for sure.
And it sounds like you keep walking. So thank you so much for sharing your story and good luck with your book and your YouTube channel. And I just really bless your journey. So thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate the conversation.
Okay, everyone, thanks for being here and listen to your inner voice, or in Gideon's case, outer voice. Maybe you're being called to the Camino yourself. Thanks for listening, and I now close the Spiritual Forum. Thanks for listening. If you like what you've heard here, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment, or a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter or make a donation to support this work at thespiritualforum.org. Tune in every week and remember, you are a divine creation, perfect and whole, just as you are.